welcome back to part 5 of Landscapes with Mr. Cody here at Liguori Academy. Right now we have nobody joining us just yet, so I'm going to give it a moment. But we're going to continue working on this wonderful landscape painting I have here, going off of a photograph I took while in Cape Cod. Today we will be discussing and painting in this beautiful foreground right here. Last time we talked, we worked extensively on my background here, really working out the greens and some details from my trees, which we will eventually touch up even more so. We also worked a little bit into the atmospheric quality of the sand and brush in this section of the hill. But today, we need to start just adding lots of paint. So we are gonna really take off. As soon as I have some more people, I've got one person joining with us. Hello, welcome. Like always, the chat is open. So if you have any questions or concerns or need to remind me of something, or if my audio is not working right, what have you, go ahead and type that in so I know. Also, again, I was just on a meeting with the rest of my staff talking about video chat, classrooms, and recorded lessons. These are all, I know they are all live streams that I'm recording now about my landscape painting process in my home studio, but they are all on the Liguori Academy YouTube channel. They're uploaded immediately after I finish live streaming, so you're more than welcome to go back and view those, kind of see my process. Today, we're going to work on this, on the foreground of this painting a little bit, really add in lots of paint, use some new materials I actually just got in the mail yesterday, and also maybe return to this painting back here that we started not too long ago, just a few weeks ago. This is the underpainting, and maybe we'll add in some more elements to that. So we've got 2 people. Hope everybody's happy, healthy, safe. Oh, we've got 3 people now. Wonderful. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started and jump right in. So my main objective today is to really develop the foreground of this painting. I need to just throw some paint on this thing because it's just really dry right now. I got some basic shapes and coloring, kind of an underpainting, basic tones and shapes, texture that I want to go for, right? If we take a look at the photograph I'm working from, this foreground area, right, is extremely dense. It's extremely dense and textural, lots of layers of color, it's like this underbrush, scrubland, dune landscape kind of feel. And so there's just a lot going on. So in order to really start working and pushing and pulling with this painting, I'm just going to go in and start adding lots and lots of paint. So what I want to focus on, I already have, you can see the basic this dark brown undertones that is kind of purplish brown color in these areas right here. I kind of already started to shape up some of those, but it isn't quite where I want it to be. Remember, the foreground especially is somewhere where you can push and pull those dark colors. Lots of people think that the shadows and those dark shapes and undertones all need to be these darker values first. What's really nice is if I start to lay in some of the lighter tones and kind of push and pull and then go back in and lay in those darker tones on top, then maybe go again, start to lay in those lighter tones. It's this kind of back and forth process of getting that sense of light, because if we're taking a look at the weather and the light in my photograph that I'm working from, it's very, very even. It's a very kind of gray day. You can see that in the sky, this blue sky, bluish grayish sky that we've already started with, right? It's that kind of nice, even tone of light that sits on everything. Now, what that does is doesn't necessarily push the brightness push the lightness or darkness of the colors. But what it does is it does push the brightness and dullness of the colors, if that makes any sense. Some of these darker tones all of a sudden are brighter and more intense. They have more liveliness to them. Likewise with these highlights, if you can see, it might be kind of hard for you to see, but there's this bright green moss. And because of that nice, even gray light, that green actually is like super bright and it like ignites because the light is even on it. It's not too warm, it's not too cold, it's not too light, it's not too dark, but it is very bright. All my colors are very intense. So what I want to do is I'm going to mix some colors. So I'm going to angle this down so you can see my palette again. Is that good? Yeah. There we go. Very cool. Thank you for the 2 people tuning in. Probably my mother and Miss Rebecca. Okay, so we're going to lay down some dioxazine purple. Remember, this is a great color, especially for those darker brown and darker green tones. Mixing this color into those is really going to get some of my colors to ignite. I gotta move some brushes around here a little bit. And I'm really excited to introduce a new material that I haven't had for a while because I ran out of it. It's a little expensive, but with my COVID-19 check, we just ordered it, and so we're getting it. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, what it's called and everything like that. So looks like I've got, as you can see, the colors that I mixed already before for last session. Because it's oil paint, it creates this kind of skin. But look, I can kind of move it around a little bit. If you can see that, it's kind of squishy, which means that there's still paint underneath that outer skin that dries up. So what I want to do is you can kind of slice it open with your palette knife, scoop it out. I'm going to start to mix some colors in this section over here. Yeah, you can see that perfect. So I've got, I think this is my Van Dyke brown. And I'm going to mix some dioxazine purple into that. And again, I'm trying to create these, they're nice darker tones, and I want to create a lot of that color because I really just want to add material to my painting. I want it to be nice and bright. Now, it's hard for me to kind of see that color immediately because it is so dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, slice open my Terra Vera green. We're going to mix some green into that. See what that looks like. Oh, that's looking good. Nice way to test too. Never forget, right? When we're mixing colors, it always looks different on the palette than it is eventually going to look on your painting because of the colors that surround it on your painting. So I'm going to hold it up to my painting. That's a nice, rich, dark color. Can you see that? Yeah. Yeah. You see how much darker that is? But it's also, the main thing is that color is really intense. And so what I think I actually need a little bit in there is some alizarin crimson. So let's angle you back down here. See if I can slice open. I don't have a whole lot of this color on my palette here. But yeah, I'm going to need some more. Give me 1 second. I got to find this color. Got some paints here. Ah, there it is. So it's an old crusty old paint too, but you can still see the name, alizarin crimson. It's this nice, really rich, purplish, magenta-ish red. I'm actually going to squeeze some out right on my palette right next to the color I'm mixing. Lift that up and mix that in. There we go. Now, the reason this is very important, I'm going to talk to you while I mix this color. The reason my undertones and these darker colors, these kind of shadowy, brushy plants in my picture, the reason I'm mixing so much red and purples into them, right, is because red, its complementary color is green. And really what I want is that nice green landscape, that lively vegetation, that moss that's growing, and these like shoots of saltwater coastal plants. I want those to really jump out at the viewer, right? There is some brush that is these kind of longer grasses. If I'm taking a look here, we'll take a look at these longer grasses and things like that. It's really hard for you to see because of the glare. But really, I want these bright greens of that moss and that coastal vegetation to really ignite. And so what I do, don't worry, this isn't blood. This is just the alizarin crimson. What I do is create the surface that those greens are going to be on top of, right? I want this to be nice and purplish red. Those kind of cool reddish, dark reddish purple tones. And so, okay, now what I just got in the mail today, shake it up a little bit. This is really good, especially when you're working with oils, right? This is an oil medium. Remember that all these paints I'm using right now are oil, so I cannot dissolve them or mix them with water. They'll just repel each other. So I use mineral spirits. We've talked about that a lot. Paint thinner, another word for that. Linseed oil helps really smooth out the color, spread it out. But what this does, this is called, let's see if you can see, yeah, Liquin. 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 Very similar to linseed oil, except linseed oil, as much as it spreads out the paint, right, it takes it a lot longer to dry. Now, Liquin spreads out your paint, as in, remember, paint is made up of two essential things. We have our binder, we have our pigment. Pigment is the color, and the binder is what holds all that pigment together in this kind of like soft, well, at least with oil paint, this soft, creamy, buttery consistency that keeps it nice. Liquin thins it out, right? Spreads out that binder without spreading out the pigment nearly as much as, say, linseed oil or paint thinner, right? Paint thinner is literally thinning out the pigment. Now, Liquin thins out the binder rather than the pigment. So it actually creates a kind of more of like a gouache or an ink for your oil paintings, which can be really nice and allow you to spread out but still maintaining a boldness and color and that consistency of your pigment, which is really important. So again, Liquin, excellent. So I'm going to pour some of that onto my palette here, right in the corner. It's kind of this gloppy, goopy substance. Doesn't look like a whole lot, but we're going to take some of that, right? Can you see that? It's kind of clear because, again, it's meant to be mixed with paint. So we're going to mix that in to my color that I just mixed for my foreground. And again, it's going to thin it out. But again, I'm going to start to add this. And I can mix that, even that, I can mix with linseed oil and some mineral spirits or paint thinner. And what that's going to do is still maintain that pigment quality, that pigment consistency. Now, I'm going to get a bigger, let's decide what kind of brush we want to use here. Let's see. I want to like really put down some paint. So let me grab a bigger brush really quick. Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to use a bit of a round brush, pretty big, or it's actually, I think it's called a filbert. If I'm not mistaken, yes, a filbert. Number 8 filbert. That's what we're using. There are different, to my students who don't know, I'm sure some people do who are listening. Each brush shape has its own different name, and each one has its size. So on here, you can, I don't know if you can see it because it's covered in paint. It says number 8 filbert, really faint right there, right? So we're going to take this color that I just mixed, add a little bit of paint thinner, maybe a little bit more Liquin, and get it in this nice soupy consistency so I can really start to get some paint going on my painting here. And again, this is a really bright color. It's really rich, red, dark. So I'm going to kind of start to add it in some areas that already have this kind of mid-gray tone. And I can start to flare it out. Now, I'm using it's a harder bristle brush. So what it's going to do is actually give me a little bit more texture as I start to add some of this material down. So on these patches I already have here, I'm going to go in, start to lay down some of this brighter, yet still darker, richer color. And again, if you notice, I'm not really looking at my photograph too much while I'm painting. I already know, I had already kind of sketched out where everything is going to be. I'm not painting exactly what I'm seeing in the photograph. That's not my goal. This is a painting that is inspired by this specific landscape. Remember, right? Like I said in my last video, lots of people think painting is dead. Painting's not, because I'm creating my own landscape here. I'm inventing this space, this area. It's a combination of the photograph and the way that my memory works for it, for this space. And so what I'm really trying to do right now is just get a lot of paint down. A lot of paint, a lot of texture down on this area. It's already starting to feel more lively. And especially with the boldness of this color, not only is that going to help my greens pop with this kind of reddish, purplish, brownish tone, but what that intensity of those shadows are going to do is pull all this foreground towards me, right? The the less bright or the more dull your colors are in the distance helps these things, these dunes and my sky and my tree line fade away a bit, right? It's called atmospheric perspective. We've talked about that in the last couple of videos as well. And I've talked about that with my painting classes when we do our landscape project. So as in this foreground, I want these things to be right up in front of me. Right up in front of me. And you can see just how much of the paint I get out of because of that liquid, right? It thins it out, but it still gives me that consistency of kind of like a gouache or water, or like a thinned out acrylic paint where that pigment is still really consistent. So I'm working here trying to really lay down this burgundy tone. That's the word I've been looking for. It's kind of like a burgundy. Again, I mixed a Van Dyke brown with alizarin crimson and a little bit of dioxazine purple to get these nice tones. Now, as I'm moving from my foreground here, right, this area down here in this corner is closest to me, right? And the way that I like to organize, especially with these dunes, there isn't a very distinct foreground, middle-ground, background, other than this kind of area here, the dunes, and then my sky, right? So what I want to do is actually lead my viewer through the painting in a way that I feel like I actually moved through the painting or moved through the space that I have once been, right? I actually visited this space. I took the photograph of the landscape. And so it's this kind of, there isn't necessarily a path. It's a meandering, it's a wandering. So I'm going to try and organize the intensity of the color and the amount of detail through a kind of zigzag that's going to kind of come through my painting towards the back. So here is where it's actually going to be closest to me. And as I move slightly to the right and up right over here, it's going to double back. I'm going to have to, through texture and that certain sense of detail and line work and paint work, move my viewer's eye to come around, back up this side of the hill, right? Then back up to this side of the hill over here. And then over this hill right here in the middle that we worked on last time, right up to this hill. And then finally on this stretch of the dunes up top here. So it's this kind of meandering zigzag that I'm working to get my viewer to really engage with, to really start to engage them. So I'm going to hold my canvas here. Again, I'm just trying to just lay down lots of paint. Really work on this brush. I'm not worrying about keeping a certain sense of the light or the color that I already had from before underneath too much, because again, this is going to be lots of layers of paint. I want it to be nice and thick in my foreground because that is where it is closest to my viewer again. So it's going to be the most paint probably in the whole painting down in this area. So I'm building off these sections I had already sketched out, using an upward brush stroke because it's this kind of flaring, my plants are growing up and out, right? This undergrowth of this brushy, scrubby landscape. Back and forth, trying to really lay down some material. There we go. And so this is going to dry relatively quickly because of that liquid. Again, it doesn't only, not only does it help me thin out the consistency of my paint for it to cover more of a surface, but it kind of dries it quicker, a little bit more like acrylic paint. And in this way, I can get more done in a certain period of time. As much as I like the slowness that oil paint allows for me to work with, sometimes it's nice when the paint dries faster so we can really get some things done. And I was really glad that it came yesterday because I was really hoping it would be here by the time we had our live stream. Which again, sorry about the confusion. We were originally supposed to have our live stream yesterday, but I had another conference call meeting with Miss Rebecca and some people at the school, which I will talk about that in just a second if you're tuning in. In just a second, probably towards the end, but you know what I'm saying. All right, so getting lots of material down. Looks like I still need to flow it over this way a little bit more. It's still a little too heavy on this side, I think, for what I want. That's why, because I missed some of these areas over here. Again, I hope everyone's happy, healthy, safe, comfortable in their homes. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or the school, Miss Rebecca, Mr. Pat, Mr. Nick. Yeah. We're getting there. We're getting there. Also, again, I know that many of you, if not all of you, do not have oil paints at home, right? These live stream sessions are not aimed at getting you to get these materials and really use these materials, but it's meant to expose you, in a certain sense, to more complicated materials that are used in a lot of common fine art work, right? And especially with my own personal practice. As we move forward, we're going to start setting up some Zoom classes, and we're going to do some other types of lessons. I want to do some figure drawing things. I know my Drawing 2 students will love that, even though they vetoed it last time we tried to do it in class. So we'll do some figure drawing. We'll do some abstract drawing, maybe some perspective drawing in relation to some drawing objects or still life pieces, right? So, all right, I need to start bringing this color up into this other section here. Now, as it's moving back into space, we talked a little bit before about micro and macro shapes that landscapes and brushwork can create, right? So as I'm working it into this kind of second hillside here, I'm working my brush strokes in more of a linear fashion to kind of try and create those layers, right? It's more spaced out down here. It's more dense, but as it rounds and moves away from us, those shapes start to squash together. And so the space in between them, and they start to form those macro shapes, those lines that kind of deviate and separate some of my landscape. So I'm going to start to layer some of these more distinct sections, kind of lining up these brush strokes to create those sections. Get some more paint on my brush here. One right in the middle here. Yeah, there we go. What's really nice with the harder or more stiff bristle brush is that it helps not put too much material onto the canvas at once, and really helps me bring out the texture of both the bristles themselves, but also the texture of the canvas. Now I'm going to take a quick step back, step out of the frame. It's looking pretty good. I want a little bit more right up here on this section. It's going to help frame my viewer's eye and keep it right here where I want it. Hey, thanks again to I see 4 people are tuning in right now. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask in the chat. I will answer them. I'm no stranger. So again, we're still working with that nice dark. You can see just how much of this color I still have left, right? This is the beauty of Liquin. Still have lots of this color, which is really good because I'm probably going to end up wanting to use that again as we move forward and start adding in some other colors. So still working on developing this hill. That's a little too much right there. I'm going to just rub that out. There we go. There we go. We're starting to get there. All right. Now, what we are going to do next. Wow, I can't believe we've already been live streaming for 24 minutes. That's crazy. All right. Painting takes time. Painting takes lots of patience, especially when you're working with slow drying materials. Landscapes they do not move quickly. So looks like I still need a little bit more right in here. So really quick, I want to start mixing some brighter greens and laying those in to show you. All right, that looks pretty good right now for right now. Just move that over here. Again, I'm trying to just keep that balance to keep my viewer's eye balanced throughout the piece. That way they're not. Sorry, I keep finding places that need this color. Just this color is really prevalent in my piece, so. All right, that looks pretty good for right now. Let's go ahead and wipe my brush off. We're gonna switch it up a little bit and focus on some of these really bright greens and maybe some of the tall grass too. And then that might be all we have time for today. I like to keep these somewhere between 30, 45 minutes. The first few were an hour long, but that seemed like a pretty long time. So I like to keep these pretty, or a little bit quicker and moving quickly. Okay. So again, let me show you the picture I'm working from here really quick. So I'm focusing on these brighter green colors and that tall grass. That's what I'm going to use now. So angle you back down here. It looks like I'm going to need to grab some greens. I've got sap green, which is this really nice kind of mid-tone green. It's going to be good. Got some here already, but the skin is dry over top of the paint. So we're going to add some of that. And I'm also going to grab, I'm almost positive I don't have it over here. We are going to grab, yeah. Hard for you to see because it's an older tube of paint. I don't use this color too often, but this really bright, it's called permanent green. Look how bright this color is. Woo! That is a bright green. So we're going to put some of that on my palette right here. It's bright, but what's nice is that it's not too cold. It's not too warm. Also going to need some yellows. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to grab cadmium yellow. This is a nice, bright, super warm yellow. Oh, looks like it's kind of dried up. Give me 1 second. Ooh, can't even get it out. Can't even get it out. Let's try and use this palette knife here. Sometimes you got to be a little inventive. Let's take. I really need this color, but I can't get it out of the tube. So what we're gonna do? Do I have an X-Acto knife up here? Yes, I do. Excellent. What we're gonna do? X-Acto knife. We're just going to cut a little slit in the side of this tube here. Oh, beautiful. And oh yeah, look at that. Whoop. And then squeeze it right out the end. So sometimes that happens, especially with oil. It can dry and it gets really hard to open in the tube. But what's nice is that your paint's always gonna form that skin over top of it, and it's still gonna be wet underneath. So what you can do sometimes with the tube of paint, if it gets, really dry up towards the end, you can't get through it or whatever, you can just cut a slit in it and use what's there, and eventually you can either put some tape over that, or the skin will dry for the paint over top of it, and it will still be wet, and your paint will be fine. That's what's so nice about oil paints, is they stay good for such a long time. So I'm going to put some of that on my palette here. Squeeze out some more. Come on. There we go. There we go. All right. Ooh, it's nice and thick. Nice, thick old oil paint. All right. So I'm going to grab some of that sap green. And I'm going to grab some of my cadmium yellow. We're going to mix that together. Here's my palette again. We're going to mix that together again. Again, I'm trying to get a really intense green, but it is relatively light. So I am going to have to add some white into it. But what that's going to do is it's going to knock my color back a little bit. It's going to knock my color back, and I don't want it to knock it back too much. So I'm going to go ahead and keep mixing in this permanent green. That way it's going to kind of cool it down, but also keep it nice and bright. Oh, that's pretty good. Looks like it still needs to be lighter. I'm going to go ahead and add some titanium buff. Remember, that's the kind of off-white color. That's really good for mixing. Again, it's going to dull out my color a little bit, but probably not too much. And I can always hold it up to my painting. Whew, man, yeah, it is super bright. So it might not look so bright right here, surrounded by all these colors on my palette, but if I hold it up here, look how bright that color is, right? That green is like electric, and it's a little too warm. If I'm looking at the moss in my photograph here, it's much cooler tone. So what I'm going to do is, I think it needs some more blue in it. So I'm going to actually, this is the blue I used for my sky, it looks like. Blue I used for my sky. We're going to mix some of that into this green here to kind of cool it down. Oh, that's looking pretty good. I'm also going to add some more white to lighten it back up a little bit. And, so I'm actually going to go ahead and put this color here and then just take a sliver of it because I need to add a decent amount of titanium buff to this color to get it to where I want it to be. I gotta find the titanium buff. Where's the titanium? Are you over here? Yes, you are. Titanium buff. Love this color. Magical mixing color. Put that on a seat. Okay, so we're gonna take a big chunk of this and we're gonna mix it into my green. Oh yeah, that's exactly what we wanted. It's almost this kind of like, it's almost a minty green, you know, that kind of lighter, but still really bright. It's got some blue in it. Get some of this blue. Now the reason it has so much blue in it, other than it being, you know, saltwater vegetation, but it's reflecting that gray, bluish sky on it really well, because at the time it was raining, and so the water on the vegetation, oh, that's perfect. That is super bright, but that is, whew, that's nice. It might be a little bright, so what I'm gonna do actually, you know what? No, let's go ahead and keep that. All right, so we've got my green, we've got my moss green. So I'm gonna use something that, so if you've watched Bob Ross before, right? Everybody knows Bob Ross does exactly what I'm doing, but 10 times better. He uses a lot of different kinds of brushes, a lot of just house painting brushes and things like that. But he uses what's called a fan brush, right? Looks like a fan. You've probably seen it before. I really like to use these too, sparingly. Now, lots of people, if you go to art school, lots of people will give you some crap if you start using fan brush all the time, especially in landscapes. I think it's kind of cheating for whatever reason. Not particularly sure why. I think maybe because it's a really specific shape rather than just the brush. It makes it a little easier. But we're going to use it in this foreground here with this green to really ignite that space, really set off my moss green. So let's see if I can actually get you a little better angle here. That looks pretty good. I might be in the way of myself there. Okay, so again, we're going to mix some liquid on my fan brush, big old glob of it, and we're going to mix that into my green. That way to thin it out, but not get rid of the boldness of its pigment quality, right? To thin out that pigment. And get a little bit on my brush here. And we're going to start to develop this foreground moss a little bit. So some of these areas are overlapping. We'll start over here. Now, I'm not using the entire shape of the fan brush. I'm trying to use maybe 1/2 of it because I like the size of that. I wish I had a fan brush that was a little bit smaller than this. That way I could really get exactly the shape I want, but I can kind of just load up the paint on one side of the brush and use it to build up some of this green. It's really electric, minty green. So I'm going to start to lay it in there, and you can already see it. It's really hard for you to tell because the light is not so good, but it looks wonderful. This green is excellent. So I've got a lot of this bright green moss, and I'm going to lay down a decent amount of this. Remember, we can always go back over it with some other colors. But for right now, I want a decent amount on my painting in order to really feel it out and work with it. Now, I also want the green to contrast against this reddish, darkish, purplish color, right? So I want to aim as much as over here, I'm starting to put the moss in between those sections, right? Because it's starting to filter out away. It gets more dense and on top of themselves, these two types of underbrush, the moss and the undergrowth. So I'm going to start over here in the corner. I'm going to start to lay down this color nice and bright in these sections. Oh, that's looking good. And what the fan brush also does that's really nice is gives it a lot of texture. Notice how I'm not stroking, I'm kind of dotting, kind of blotting my way into the painting to kind of create that fuzzy texture of the moss. Oh, that's nice. That is nice, looking good. Hope you can see that from on the screen. Might be a little difficult, but it's looking really nice. You can see that some of that, right? Maybe once I'm done here, I'll zoom in a little bit and show you. Start to bring that up here into this section a little bit. Again, mixing some more liquid into some of the paint, really thin it out and give it that consistency, that boldness I want. Secret ingredient of liquid. All right. It's really easy to cover a decent amount of ground with this green as well with the fan brush, just because the fan brush is a bigger shape and that texture really ignites that surface. It really does. This underbrush some wonders. So I'm going to add some in here. Notice how I'm kind of doing it in these little clumps, right? Again, I'm painting moss, and moss kind of grows in these little clumps of textural softness, right? I don't want it to be too dense where it gets rid of some of the contrast, and the liquid actually helps with that as well. Helps kind of create that space in between each of the individual brush strokes in order to give it that texture. Not only is this painting moss, though, too, it kind of helps blend out the still wet reddish, brownish purple that I just laid down before. Kind of helps spread it. It almost looked like the tops of those plants, maybe some long grass. Maybe I can come in here, get some more liquid again. Mix it in here a little bit. I need just a little bit of mineral spirits. Thin it out even more. There we go. Load it up on the end of my brush. And we're going to deal with, again, remember, so this is these nice big macro and micro shapes. But up here, I started to keep them in line thin together. So I'm going to be a little bit more specific about how I add some of this green up in these areas, right? Kind of create some of those lines, those lines of moss that are coming through. just peeking through and seeing that color. Sorry, I got a little quiet there. I was concentrating. All right. Get a little bit more on my brush here. Get just the tip of those branches. And you can see kind of these lines of the rows of the underbrush that I'm trying to emulate as it's coming through. You can see that, right? These kind of lines, these individual rows of that underbrush and that longer grass and the moss. And as it fades into the side of this hill, maybe there's another happy little cluster here. Brings it out a little bit. Kind of works its way into the edge of this hillside. It'll help deviate between, we've got this hill section. This one's closest to us, and it's another one rolling away, but there's this clear change right here. Bring that in just a little bit, right as we go. Gorgeous, gorgeous. Start to add some of that texture here. Some of these spots. Trying to create that even balance of greens. It's almost this kind of like unnatural limey green, but it looks really nice and lush and textural here. Let's get a closer look. Let's get you in here because I feel like you can't really see what I'm talking about too much. So now you can see some of that texture brush work, right? Creating that underbrush, and as I move away, let's take a step back so you can still see it. There we go, right? From a distance, you can see it's always important to step back from your work to kind of see where you're going. It looks like I need a little bit more work. Let's see if I can point it out. A little bit more work in here again with that reddish brown color. So I'm actually going to come back. Get you situated. Perfect. All right. So I'm going to go back in with some of that darker brownish purple red. I'm going to use a little bit smaller brush. One that I can give a little bit more direction for that color to go in, right? And especially in this area right down here, I'm going to start to go in with some line work. Start to go in with some line work. Fan out these little areas a little bit and add in some bold. You know what? I think I actually need to darken that color even a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is go back to that reddish brown color. Let's go back down to my palette here. And I'm going to add, where are you? I know it's here. Here we go. I'm going to add some Prussian blue. I'm going to bring out that purple quality, right? It's really reddish right now, but I really want to kind of deepen it up. So I'm going to put some of this blue over here. And not very much at all. Just enough to really kind of deepen that color. This is a really dark blue, almost blackish. But when it mixes with some colors, might have been a little too much, but oh no, that's gorgeous. Gorgeous color. Gorgeous color. Absolutely gorgeous. That's just dark enough. Just blue enough. Gonna make sure that blue is mixed in there nice and well. Right, look how nice that color is. That is gonna look so nice in that foreground. A nice deep, darker purplish brown. Okay, so let's go back in here. Again, there's still a decent amount of liquid mixed in here. I just got liquid all over my brush. On. Sorry, on my palette knife. I got liquid all over my palette knife. All right. So we've got this color. Let's come in here and start to, oh yeah. Again, I'm going to use these kind of brush strokes that lift up on the painting. And what's going to happen is it's going to mix a little bit with that green that's already there, but that's okay. It's going to lighten that color, but that's all right because it's going to bring out some of this blue, this bluish purple. It's going to be really nice. Going to be really nice. So come in here, flare out a little bit. Again, not being too picky about what the brush strokes look like necessarily, right? I'm not trying to be super photorealistic, but I am trying to lay down material in a way that gives the painting some life, right? This vegetation is lively. It's growing on the coastal regions of North America. We want it to breathe that kind of life into it. So I'm going to what this does is creates an emphasis or that contrast between my positive and my negative space. Now, we talked a little bit about pushing and pulling some of those colors back and forth, right? Pushing and pulling those colors, that darkness and lightness, laying it on top of each other. What that does is actually play with some of the positive and negative space, right? The positive space being the plants that are the tips of those bright, those warm colors that are on top. And then also the negative space, which is the ground underneath and some of that underbrush and that underpainting, those tones I already have in there. This is looking good. This blue might be a little too much, actually, now that I'm looking at it. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to mix some brown into it. What that's going to do, blue and brown, traditionally are really nice colors to mix if you're trying to mix your own type of black. Now, it's not going to be like the rich ivory black or lamp black that you would normally see in a tube, but it is going to be this deeper, darker color, and it's still going to be nice and warm. The reason I think it needs some more brown in there is to warm that color back up, right? I'm starting to get some of this blue in here mixing with the green, and it looks a little too cool. So what I need it to do is warm up in these areas, and this is looking pretty good. So I don't want to overdo it because I do still really like those brown and red tones I had already started to lay down. Oh, that's nice. Maybe I'll do that. Kind of blot a little bit underneath some of these sections. Really starts to help create that contrast again. That's nice. Blends in that green just a little bit more. Again, hey, thanks again for all these people who have stuck around. I got 2 likes, 3 people with me now. 1 just went away. I had 4 for a while. I had 5, 6 people tuning in. I really appreciate it. And again, these videos are all uploaded to YouTube on the Liguori Academy YouTube channel after the fact, after the live stream. So you can always refer back to them again later on. All right. Wow, cannot believe it's already been 48 minutes with you all. It's wonderful. It's wonderful how time flies when you're sucked into a painting. Get some of this darker color down here on the bottom. I hope that you all have learned something today, and had a nice, peaceful, relaxing time watching me as I develop this painting. Take a step back. That actually looks pretty good. I don't know if I need any more of that darkish brown color, maybe a little bit over here just to make sure that my viewer's eye does not go too far. So let's go ahead and, you know what? I think it needs a little bit of linseed oil in there too. A little bit of linseed oil, smooth it out, loosen it up a little bit. It's a little dry, a little stiff. Start to add some of these flares in here, maybe get some of this underbrush texture again. That blue works really nicely with some of these undertones of browns and reds that I was working with before. Blue really helps bring out some purplish tones. Let's get some, helps me get that sense of depth and darkness in my colors as well, which can be really nice. Okay. It's looking pretty good. All right. Right on. So this is a nice start to that foreground, right? My goal for today was to really lay on some paint, get some texture down, really start to work into it. And I think we accomplished that. So you can see the difference in texture and intensity of contrast and things right here in my foreground compared to my hill. I need to start to bring some of that up into this hillside, right? This is my next section for, my zigzag through my space, right? To get to my back dunes. So thank you all so much for tuning in today. Next time, we're going to continue working on this painting right here, probably, and also continue working on this. Probably, I'm really enjoying working on this. I hope you think so too. In the future, we're working on getting some of the students, if any of my students are watching right now, some supplies. We're going to ship them to you hopefully in the next week or two. And that way, once I'm guaranteed that I know you have some supplies to work with, we'll start to do some demos of drawing where you could follow along with me about perspective, about portraiture, about figure drawing. And so I'll let you know about that soon. But thank you so much for tuning in today. Hope you stay happy, healthy, and safe. And take care. Thanks so much.